America has a pre-existing condition, which is the lack of morality and the ever-present dishonorable behavior that has brought us down systematically and incrementally, and we are headed toward a state of complete depravity. That answers the question at the end of the clip I will play. You see, the history of the Cold War, Operation Paperclip, Project Overcast, MK Ultra, MK Search, Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke, the Phoenix Program, COINTELPRO, and many, many more prove definitively and on record that psychological operations are a part of the government, and that 1,600 Nazi scientists and their families have been integrated into psychological operations and the military-industrial complex on all levels. So the people who are criminals, many of whom were convicted at the Nuremberg trials and others, had their records expunged by the government for the purpose of unconventional warfare here and abroad. So we have secret societies at play here on record, as I've proven through Colin Ross, MD, and others, that the Scottish Rite Freemasons funded MK Ultra. So we know that Nazi criminals and secret societies have been integrated into the military-industrial complex. So why wouldn't they integrate local gangs that already brag about their connections with the government, smuggle in drugs using government officials, prison staff, and correction officers? They're criminals who have a great propensity for criminality and collusion with unscrupulous authorities. All the people who know how to keep a secret, quote unquote, all the people who are criminals, who turn a blind eye to rape, pedophilia, satanic ritual abuse, and trauma-based mind control, have come together, a sort of criminal conglomerate of fiends, villains, and other unethical forms of life. So without further ado, let me play the clip.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
On the morning of May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered, effectively ending World War II in Europe. During the war, Germany had developed many advanced technologies, including the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 rocket, and the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter. These advancements were kept highly secret, but now that Germany had fallen, they were up for grabs. Germany had already been split into 3 zones of post-war control during the Yalta Conference a couple months before the war ended. This meant that American, English, and Soviet intelligence teams were racing to retrieve as much precious equipment as they could before the division took place. Though America was trying to recover equipment and weapons, the most important of all were the Nazi scientists. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA for short, was directly responsible for Operation Paperclip, a campaign to get these scientists away from the Soviets so they could work for us in the looming Cold War. However, in order to gain the upper hand, war criminals were never tried, but instead swiftly integrated into the newly formed military-industrial complex. And some of these scientists were even tried and found guilty, but were still brought to the U.S. By accepting these people into the country, the United States government willingly chose a policy of technology over justice. This raises an important question. Did the integration of Nazis into Cold War America cause an ideological contamination of government?
A question that I've answered already. So from the Office of Strategic Services came the CIA. Strategy. Mind control. Military mind control. Military psychology. Military psychological operations. Psychological warfare. Technological terrorism. Chemical warfare. Biological warfare. Germ warfare. So we know that these people are the real terrorists. We know they never intended to allow free speech and civil liberties to continue. They were always concerned with communication, confounding people with an unfavorable view of what they're doing, confounding their speech, messing up their communication and their ability to communicate. Psychological warfare, propaganda campaigns, which relates to both of those. Communication and psychology are key here. And for what? One would be rather daft to assume that these dishonorable creeps, that these betrayers of humanity that show an appalling lack of humanity, aren't up to their old tricks. How naive and gullible would one have to be to think that we do not live in a criminal state? When one does their due diligence, they see that there's a connection between the cults and the CIA. The CIA infiltrated the cults. That's one way to look at it. And they learned how to control minds from the research and the information they attained from looking into what they call cult brainwashing. Another way to look at it, which us true scholars acknowledge as true, is that these cults were started by the CIA. You see, the Masons started the OSS, which eventually became the CIA. They guided intelligence agencies from the beginning onward. These Masons believed in intellect over superstition and subjugating men using their intellect, or intelligence, if you will, and intelligence agencies. It's quite simple, really. The mystery schools, the cults, they start the culture, the countercultures, the mainstream cultures. They uphold the social norms. And they tell people like me, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Have you ever heard that? Well, why wouldn't they say, well, if you don't like it, try to change it? You know? Well, every once in a while, some of them do. But they know how stupid it is to say that, so they resort to some sort of a mind trick by saying, well, go somewhere else, because this is how it is here, and we're not going to change. Of course, there is nowhere to go, because they're expanding their despicable philosophies and their cultural imperialism. They're scientific Satanists. So one must be clear and coherent when dealing with these people, when explaining what they're doing, because they're doing things in a way that the average person who lacks basic intuition, the average person who isn't very affluent, who isn't very sharp, they will miss what is going on because they are clinging on to mainstream social norms and mainstream misconceptions. They're clinging on for dear life. And there's a lot of them who say things like, well, it isn't so bad. If you were starving in the middle of nowhere, they would tell you it's not so bad. If you were drowning, they would tell you it's not so bad. because they intend to hold the order of society no matter what. Maintenance men, if you will. So why do most of you go along with this? Why do women date them? In the book, Adam Cohen's book, around page 112 or so, it talks about how about 120 or 130 out of 160 of the workers who were placed there to do eugenics and to ensure eugenic policies in hospitals and asylums and prisons were women. Feminism. Part of their tools of control, controlling your speech, the ADL, the feminist movements, the Anti-Defamation League, to defame. They want to have a monopoly on the ability to defame, to discredit, and certainly to coerce and the use of force. Everything I talk about is mainstream history. Mainstream history, only the real Christians and the real Muslims in this country were the real good guys. Mainstream history, and there are a lot of pagans who pose as Christians, who misrepresent themselves as Christians. They confuse people. Just remember about the pure form of something versus the perceived form. Paganism in its pure form brings scientific racism to the table, as opposed to we are all God's children. It brings baby killing to the table, child sacrifice, ritual abuse, Cronus and Saturn. Saturday, which is probably the most loved day of the week because you don't have to go to church. You still remember Friday night, but you don't have to work like you do on Friday. And this is all generally speaking, and you can go out clubbing Saturday night. You get to sleep in, and you get to go out clubbing, and you don't have to go to church. It's the party day. It is the most celebrated day, just as Saturn is the most celebrated pagan deity, and many of you will figure that out the hard way. The festival of Saturnalia, look it up. The Eclogue of Virgil, look it up. The New Order of the Ages, the dollar bill, the Eclogue of Virgil, the Reina de Saturna, or whatever the Latin is, under the reign of Saturn. Sterilization, eugenics, societal discomfort with eugenics, but eugenics being done covertly because of the stigmatization of eugenics as a part of the war effort against the Nazis. They put it out there that the Nazis were doing eugenics and downplayed America's part in eugenics. Laughlin, Davenport, David Starr Jordan, Margaret Sanger, they downplayed these names. Cold Harbor. The Carnegie Institute, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Well, I'm almost out of time here, so let me wrap this up. To make a long story short, we live in a criminal society, and there are criminals, organized criminals, cult criminals, prison gangs, street gangs, criminal political parties that collaborate with all of the above to push their left, right, and libertarian agendas. Controlled opposition criminals, crooked cops, crooked feds, criminal military with a high rape rate and gay rate. Just look up the homosexual rape rate in the military. Look up the rape rate in general. Criminals wanting to maintain an order of criminality and to control romance, love life, reproduction, procreation. Well, I'm out of time. That's why they're sabotaging my love life